All right. Welcome, y'all, to Of the People. So, just to begin, adding some context to what tonight's show is going to be, it's going to be an open type of discussion between someone more so on the left and someone more so on the right side about a current event that's happening. And for our discussion today, we're really going to be focusing on the 2024 election. Adding some context just before we dive into the discussion, on Sunday, November 10th, CNN and Washington Post columnist Fareed Zakaria said the Democrats failed this election for three primary reasons. One, for not taking immigration seriously enough. Two, for rallying around prosecutions of Trump. And three, for elevating identity politics. Bill Maher said it was actually progressive policies which caused the Dems to lose, pointing to things like masking, being in support of trans students, and not shutting down campuses for protesting the war in Gaza. Just this week, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, hosts of Morning Joe, traveled to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump and essentially bend the knee. It was these same liberals who just a few weeks ago were denouncing the words and actions of Trump and those around him as Hitlerian. Yet, when given the opportunity to capitulate and find a common enemy, being illegal immigrants, the quote-unquote liberal establishment seems all too eager to roll over. So, to discuss the 2024 election and the subsequent fallout, tonight we have with us Joey Zeldin. Joey is a public policy and impact associate at a nonprofit trade association in Washington, D.C. He describes himself as a pragmatic progressive who is happy to discuss policy and ideas with anyone on the political spectrum. We also have Mark, a Coptic Christian and an engineer with libertarian conservative views who supported Trump since 2015 and voted for him in both the 2020 and 2024 elections, who is also happy to discuss issues with anyone willing to have a conversation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I'd like to start actually by going to Joey. So given all of these comments by the so-called liberal establishment, it really raises one simple question. Do we, as Americans on both the left and the right, really want to live in a truthful world?
I mean, yeah. So I think Democrats, and it's funny you say live in a truthful world, because I think Democrats just need to come to the consensus that, they did not run a good campaign. I think that there are multiple factors that have kind of come around as, things of this is where they went wrong, or this is where they went wrong, or they didn't, get this message out. But I would say that, yeah, I think that there is definitely, in both the left side of the aisle and the right side of the aisle, I think that Democrats tried too hard to lean into the whole, we want to bring on Republicans. And with that, they weren't listening to their own voter base. And I don't think it's bad to necessarily bring on some Republicans, but there was a statistic that showed that, that didn't work. Republicans voted, the same in both elections. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think it was like 5% of Republicans, voted in like 2020 for, Joe Biden or something like that. And then 5% voted for, Harris in 2024. And so it was kind of like, I think that if Democrats want to be successful in 2026 and hell, even here in 2025, here in Virginia, we have our state elections. I think, across the board, I think if Democrats want to be successful, then yeah, they're going to have to start being truthful. But I think they're going to have to start being truthful to their voter base and to the folks that are actually keeping them alive, which is, the small donors, the people who are donating a buck or two, every paycheck, or, the people who are protesting for things like Gaza and, Palestinian, rights and things like that. I think that's where you need to at least bring them to the table. You can't shut them out and, kind of say, well, we've done things this way. And, there's this kind of bubble around them.
Gotcha. And what about you, Mark? Do you think we as Americans want to live in a truthful world?
Yeah, I think inherently everybody wants truth. So of course everybody wants, to live in a truthful world, regardless of nationality or, like wherever country you're at. But I think with this election, Democrats, in my opinion, lost this because like they overestimated the reach that their media has on TV. if you look at like their streaming numbers, they're not doing nearly as well as a lot of these what they would call like podcasters. Like people that they don't have like a whole corporation behind them backing them up. So they think that their reach is small, when in reality, a lot of people watch those people and they get their opinions from them. And I think they were like MSNBC and all those, like, and I'm not even talking about one side right now. I'm talking about like all of TV news. I think it overestimated the amount of people that actually watch it, and that bit them in the butt.
Yeah, and I think honestly, both of you are really saying the same thing at the end of the day. And this is what I heard the most from voters across the political aisle. I think what people are looking for is not necessarily truth, but authenticity. And even though Trump consistently lied over and over again, and so did Harris, of course, and so did Biden and Clinton in previous elections, politicians lied. That's their MO.
What?
But
no way.
Trump was authentic in his lying. I think that's the key difference. Would you guys agree?
Give me an example.
He said lay out them facts.
Well, simply put, cats and dogs, right? Who's eating the cats and dogs in Ohio, in Springfield, Ohio?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Regardless of how absurd that particular comment was, right? People view it as authentically Trump. He's not hiding what he believes. And I think we saw Trump fully embrace this particular side of him. He realized that this is what people like. They like this authentic side, regardless of the dark parts that he might go to. They want to see this. They want to see it show. And I think we're particularly seeing that as well through some of the nominations he's putting up for his cabinet, right? People like a show. People like some authenticity as well. And the biggest disconnect that I've personally noticed between Democrats and Republicans is that, at least for the most part, Republicans have created a particular information bubble for their own voter base, yet are still able to come across as genuine to the vast majority of Americans. Even though Americans, broadly speaking, disagree with the policy proposals that are being put out by the Republican side, they'll still go out and vote for them, particularly because I think Americans more so value authenticity in their leaders rather than any individual policy decision. Your thought?
If I may, I think one of the things that, struck out to, that was really, it's funny to say this example, but, the Trump McDonald's example, let's look at that. There's this kind of part where a lot of people, and I work in DC, and so I'm surrounded in a DC bubble. And you have a lot of people who, especially in the campaign, world and things like that, who are kind of like, oh my gosh, that's so dumb. That's so silly. Why would he even do that? This is ridiculous. And to a point, yes, it is pretty ridiculous to see a former United States president, now president-elect, but at the time, a former United States president working the fryers in a McDonald's. But at the same time, like, that in a way, what's that?
It's a bit elitist to think that way.
It's a bit elitist to think that way. And, at the same time, like, there are a lot of people whose day jobs are working in fast food restaurants. That's how they make their living. And so if someone like Trump, who is wanting to run for people and has continually ran on a platform of saying that he wants to, run for, Americans of the, blue collar class and of, Americans who struggle in this economy. And he's going out and doing the jobs that, that they're doing, even if it looks ridiculous, that's going to speak to someone like that. And I think, one of the things that the Harris campaign fumbled was that, there's this DC bubble that sometimes the campaigns on both sides, but primarily Democrats, try too hard to tune into these like pop culture references or these things that are trending. And you had, what's that? I was just about to say the Kamala is brat trend. It's kind of like, I've talked to people about this before. It's like, I listened to Charlie XCX. I thought that was funny like the first 2 days it was out. But that was the continuing theme of the campaign. And that's not serious to voters who are struggling to put groceries on their table, or voters who are, struggling with a rent. When you focus too much on those themes and you veer away from working class folks and you just veer towards these trends that are kind of gotcha and viral things, yeah, you're not going to win over voters because after a while, they're not going to take you seriously. And this is coming from someone, I voted for Kamala. I was confident in her policies. But at the same time, when she lost it, it was shocking, but it was not surprising.
Yeah, makes sense. What about you, Mark? Do you agree with Joey that, Democrats are
Yeah.
hopping too much on trends?
Yeah, no, I thought that the whole, because I don't listen to Charlie XCS and I don't have like an opinion about her either way. But when it came out, I was like, okay, I see that they're trying to meme, they're trying to reach out to younger people, but like, I don't think anyone older than 25 or 30 is going to understand this, and they're making it such a big part of their campaign where it was like, I think they invested too much of their attention into one thing that was just not going to give them returns. But as far as like even the working class, like I hear from people in like unions all the time, and they're saying like they think that one of the biggest reasons that the Democrats couldn't win this one is because like historically the unions would support the Democrats and the leaders would come out and say like we endorse this candidate, and this time they didn't do that. And if you saw the surveys of the union members, most of them would say they wanted Trump this time around.
Actually,
and just
on
like
that,
feeding their kids and stuff.
so on the union topic, right? We saw actually under the Biden administration really big steps taken in support of unions and working class people through policy specifically, right? I mean, he was one of the first presidents to walk the picket line with striking members.
Mm-hmm.
There were broad labor policies passed specifically in support of expanding unions. As Trump comes into office, the National Relations Board is going to be shrunk. Certain of its authorities regarding unions and the illegality of actually union busting are also going to be brought into question and potentially be strucken down. And the entirety of the NLRA could potentially be ruled unconstitutional as well. So here's the thing. We're seeing a broad disconnect between the actual policies that are being implemented from either side and the messaging that's going on, right? Because right now, what we're hearing from the liberal media, the liberal establishment, is the fact that Democrats this past election focused too much on progressive policies. They focused too much on trans issues. They focused too much on just all of these social issues that aren't speaking to. But is that really the case? Are we seeing Democrats focus entirely on trans issues? I don't think I recall seeing a single trans ad from the Harris campaign this past cycle.
Do you mind if I take this one, Mark?
Yeah, go for it. But I do have opinions.
I mean, so first off, like I'm someone who supports, the LGBT community, like, with all my heart. I have friends who are trans. I have friends who are gay. I have, like, and so for me, like that issue is important to me. I did not personally see a ton of that coming out of the Harris campaign. I think you saw a lot of, support for it in a way of more like, Harris was very unequivocally supportive in some of her actions, or like, for instance, her, her jacket that she wore. But I think one of the biggest things was that I think a lot of the conversations around, not just, LGBTQ rights, but some of these other, hot topic issues that we have, like abortion, there isn't really a space for people to talk about that stuff. There's not a space where people can, especially liberals and progressives. And I'm a progressive myself, but I think like forums like even these, like what we're doing right now, there wasn't really any sort of way for a liberal or progressive voter, in my eyes, to actually talk about those policies from a common sense standpoint of how they can be enacted and like the actual like percentages of them as far as like, surgeries and things like that happen under public dollars. And there was no like real defense of some of that stuff, and no, when Republicans would make outlandish claims on things like, you send your kid off to school and they have transgender operations and they come back a different gender. Like that does not happen at a school. But there was no real defense on the Democrats' part to actually defend that. So that just kept being something that it kept being perpetuated over and over and over again until like that was something that you just heard a lot about. And in my eyes, it's kind of like when you do that, you're not in a way, you may have not put out a lot of stuff saying, oh yeah, or even if you could have said, we're for all these rights, but when you're not defending the hateful rhetoric or the things that are just generally against what you're trying to, defend, then ultimately that point is going to end up being very hard to come back and say, no, we actually, like, this is what actually happens, or like, this is how we feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're, I think, pretty right about that. We're seeing Democrats fail to push back on anything. Rather, their strategy for this past cycle is, no, we agree with the Republicans, actually. We're fully on board. We just want to do it slightly different. We're going to say we're inclusive, but we agree with the Republicans at the end of the day. And I think we're seeing the exact same currently happen with Nancy Mace introducing this anti-trans legislation to prevent trans people on the Capitol from using their preferred bathroom. And Democratic leadership is nowhere to be seen. They are completely in the shadows, where it's to the point where the actual trans members, trans lawmakers, and just overall trans people working in Capitol Hill have to just sit and take this constant beating by people who hate the fact that they exist. Now, I know that I'm particularly seeing it from this perspective. I want to bring in Mark. What do you think about this particular disconnect that we're seeing from the policies that are being enacted and the messaging that's actually being said?
I think, like I was saying with how legacy media kind of, pooped the bed. One of the things that they did that I thought was really going to hurt them in the long run was when they started marking people who are technically liberal as being far right and right, like Joe Rogan and people like Elon Musk. I feel like he's not traditionally a liberal or a Republican. He's a liberal person. He has liberal tendencies. I think when they started marking everyone that was right of slightly left as being straight, like far right, that's when you had that divide. Because then people were saying like, I know this person. He's a famous celebrity. He's been like, I've heard his opinions for decades or whatever. He's not far right. He seems reasonable, and now he's being marked for this opinion or whatever.
Yeah.
And as far as like the trans policy was one of those things, but I don't think it was the only thing. And I think that we've reached a point in our country where people they feel like they can express their opinions on trans ideology without being attacked for it.
I think hopefully that's the intended outcome, right? To be able to actually have a discussion without being attacked for who you are as an individual. And it, for some reason, seems like the trans issue, especially in modern America, is a particularly galvanizing one. I mean, even Elon Musk's entire foray into this election would not have happened if his own daughter did not come out as trans. Elon Musk was very in support of LGBT rights back in 2018. But ever since that happened, he did a complete 180. And I want to actually slightly shift from the trans issue and more so on the broader impact of Elon Musk in this past election. Do either of you think that he had a meaningful impact on the outcome of this election, or not really? The election would have gone exactly the same with him or without him.
Well, when you try to buy, when your PAC entices people to go out and vote with a financial reward attached to it, yeah, you're going to get people out and voting who normally wouldn't vote. And even people who already vote, especially if a Republican wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to go vote, and then Elon Musk, slides in his DMs and says, hey man, here's my PAC, if you sign this petition, you can get a chance to win some money. It's like, hell yeah, I'm going to go vote Republican now, as if I already, wasn't going to walk out the door and do so anyways. And I think that alone had a huge impact on the election. But then, I mean, that's the richest man in, I believe, the world, if I'm not mistaken. And so
that's what they say.
And so, my personal opinion, I think it's absolutely disgusting that money had any sort of gross impact on politics, period. I mean, the fact that we had, over $1 billion raised by the Harris campaign. And then on top of that, Elon Musk, the richest man, just absolutely bankrolling Trump's campaign, towards its, final days. Like, that was absolutely disgusting. And it just shows how much influence money has in politics. But I think that Elon Musk doing that did have such a profound impact on the Trump campaign. I think that that's how you got out a lot of those people who weren't really sure what they were going to be, how they're going to be voting yet, especially people in younger demographics. I mean, people in Gen Z men like the Joe Rogan podcast. Gen Z men like Elon Musk. And so it's kind of like when you have things like that on the side of one candidate, it doesn't matter who it is. If you have things that entice people and those things are going towards one candidate, then that's what's inevitably going to happen. And that's what we saw with Elon Musk. I mean, he did his thing, and now he's going to be leading the Department of Government Efficiency, if that's going to work out at all. But, it's just stuff like that where it shows you how much not only someone of just general social status has on an election, but also money in politics. I mean, money is just a big thing in campaigns these days.
So on that, actually, Mark, as someone who has supported Trump since 2015, and I believe supports quite a bit of his policies as well, how do you personally feel with such a deep involvement by Elon Musk? Because, of course, he has not been historically conservative. He's actually been quite the opposite, right? Historically speaking, he's had a lot of progressive views and advocated for progressive policies.
He made EVs cool.
Exactly. But we've had a really big turn. So I guess my question to you is, how do you feel about him on the campaign? Do you think he's being genuine in his beliefs, or do you think he has some kind of ulterior motive behind all of this?
I think both. I think when people donate to a political campaign and they expect that the policies that are going to be enacted after this person wins is going to help their company or whatever, there are ethical issues, questions with lobbying, but both sides do it. And I think people are attacking Elon Musk because there was a name and a face, and people know what a name and a face are. Like, they're like, that's a person, he's funding it. But with these huge PACs where the money is just coming from soulless organizations, you can't be as critical as you would with just one person, one body to point to. As far as was he meaningful? Like, would Trump have won regardless of Elon's involvement? I have no idea. I don't like that Elon Musk gave out his money, and if that's illegal, people should investigate it. But if it's not illegal, then even though it's ethically questionable, it's his money and he can do whatever he wants with it. Yeah, that's what I would say with that.
So on that, we've had PAC's involvement in campaign fundraising for a very long time, right? We've had big donors completely spearhead a bunch of these political campaigns. But I think it's a little bit different this time when the leader of one of these PACs is directly in meetings with all of these world leaders. I mean, Emmanuel Macron just, extended an invitation to Trump and Elon Musk. He's essentially become either like a shadow president or a replacement for J.D. Vance, yet has not been elected into any kind of government position. So here's the thing. People voted for Trump. People liked what Trump had to say. People didn't vote for Elon Musk. His name was never on the ballot. Is it not concerning at all that we might have someone who, by the standard definition, could be classified as an oligarch and who is directly involved in every single minute policy decision that the Trump campaign is making right now?
I mean, in my eyes, I think it's absolutely corrupt. I think it just shows how, again, like I just said, that dude just bankrolled Trump's campaign. And so I think that Trump is a person who desires loyalty, and obviously giving a ton of money to a presidential campaign sure looks pretty loyal, even if there might be an ulterior motive. And so I think that, what you're probably going to end up seeing is, and this goes for all presidents. I mean, like, when you vote in a president, you're not just voting in the president and the vice president, of course, but that comes with cabinet picks. That comes with, who's going to sit on the Secretary or who's going to sit in the Department of Treasury, who's going to sit in the Department of Education, who's going to sit, in the, Department of
Education.
Yeah, well, yeah, that might not last any longer, of course, because what's her name? I just totally is it
Linda McMahon?
Linda McMahon. I knew it was Vince McMahon's wife. Like, she's the Secretary of Education now, and Linda McMahon, I would not trust to teach a child with a 10-foot pole. Entertaining woman, she knows how to run, that stuff, but, it goes back to, I think people have such a disconnect from what the presidency is in regards to when you elect someone, the president puts in so many appointees to places. And the fact that Elon Musk is in the president's inner circle is concerning for policies around, billionaires and millionaires paying taxes and antitrust legislation and legislation around, honestly, in my eyes, I see it as antitrust and billionaire millionaire corruption. Collusion, yeah. But I know there's many other things that I could talk about in that sphere, but those two in particular, it's kind of like that's a guy who right now owns an electric car company, a space company that has, hangars and things like that and equipment at Kennedy Space Center. Like SpaceX has hangars and stuff there and regularly does missions there. And this guy is getting ready to lead the Department of Government Efficiency and do whatever else that Trump tells him to do. And that's scary. That is scary that someone with that much wealth and that much influence is going to be, saying things on certain policies that could affect millions of Americans in super drastic ways.
You're pretty right about that. How about Mark? Because I think I'm agreeing with pretty much what you're saying, Joey. But Mark, do you disagree with what Joey just said there?
I think everyone wishes that there wasn't any government money funding people, or like you wouldn't have this collusion where people are like, I'll support you, I'll give you help here, and you help me out with this tax policy for my company or whatever. There are ethical questions with that. I would make 2 points though, and I would say that everyone does this. Every person that runs for any kind of office has people that they know beforehand they're going to install as this cabinet member or whatever. Like I said before, like Elon, he's a very famous person. He's the richest person alive. That's what they say. I don't really know, but you got to give him credit for being out there and honest that he's out there and he's supporting. I also have to say, like, I think Elon could have been making way more money not being with Trump compared to helping him with this, but I don't know how that's going to play out. Like in the next 4 years, if we see policies that are going to directly put money in his pocket, then you could say there's collusion. But I think he's a guy whose time is better spent elsewhere, not being like a public servant.
I think you're right. He could have potentially made more money, but we're seeing some fallout already, right? Immediately following the election, Tesla hit $1 trillion market cap and Musk's own personal net worth ballooned to $300 billion. Trump was not too happy about that. So that was definitely an interesting play. That relationship, being as dynamic and large as it is definitely going to, if it blows up, more so when it blows up, is going to be relatively spectacular. It's going to be pretty huge, and the downwind effects are going to be pretty drastic as well. And actually, on the topic of the cabinet picks, this is not surprising. Even Linda McMahon is not surprising. Linda McMahon, alongside Howard Lutnick, were co-chairs of the Trump transition team. And actually, Linda McMahon was a little upset at being nominated as Secretary of Education, because she actually wanted to be Secretary of Commerce, but Howard ended up getting that instead. And that was actually kind of a surprise as well. But it's not a surprise that they are in Trump's government in some capacity. I want to actually talk about more so the bigger failure of Democrats this past election cycle.
Sorry, can I make one quick point?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I do think like people are always a little alarmed when they see businessmen going into government positions, because then they think those businessmen are going to benefit their own companies. But I think that the government needs people that have built companies, that have managed companies to manage the government. I think when you have someone in government that's been doing public service their whole life, they might not have the skills necessary to like fire a bunch of people if that's what the department needs or whatever. The hard decisions that like a businessman or a CEO would have to do on a daily basis.
On that, do you think it would be better? And I think we're seeing a big issue with the Supreme Court on this as well. For like the day-to-day government jobs, the people who are, looking at medicine and figuring out which medicine to approve at the FDA, do you think these more minute jobs that actually require industry specialization, would they be better fit by someone who's an outsider, someone who's worked in the private world, maybe had their own business? Or do you think they're better staffed by people who have that government experience? And actually, same thing on the leadership side as well. The people who are put in charge to lead these different departments, is it better to have these business leaders, or is it better to have someone who has the experience within government? I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on that, actually.
Yeah, I have to disagree with the point on businesses and CEOs, largely because I think unless it's, the Department of Treasury or Commerce, where something that I guess is directly tied to running a business, I think that you need more people who have government experience, because more often than not, I think certain departments need certain specializations. I think that the fact that the Department of Education right now is run by a former school superintendent and someone who has been an educator is great, because that is the perfect hybrid in my eyes of someone who has administrative experience running things and someone who is immersed in the education field. But I think putting someone like Linda McMahon, or, not anymore now, but putting Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, just because someone has done something of, like Matt Gaetz was, I believe he was a lawyer, and he
I
had
think
his
he
JD.
withdrew. I think he withdrew, but
For
I'm not
2
sure.
years.
He did withdraw, but the point stands of just because someone has done one thing, or, and people say this about Trump, like Trump was a successful business owner. Trump was not a successful business owner. He was good at marketing himself, and he had a great team of people who could, put the Trump name everywhere, but his businesses were not good, and they failed multiple times. And I think that when you have these departments, and even the President of the United States, I am very much in the belief that the President of the United States ought to be someone who is a sitting governor, is a sitting senator, or is someone who has been involved in at least somewhat of a political, job or responsibility, because a lot of times the responsibilities that come with being a department secretary or being a president or being, even a senator. I mean, I believe that normal people should more so run in Congress. I don't necessarily think people who are only in politics should be running for Congress, but these need to be folks who have both government experience, because there's a lot of red tape and there's a lot of bureaucratic work that happens that someone like Linda McMahon, or someone like, trying to think of another crazy Trump pick, like that guy who just got nominated for defense secretary, the guy who, people are kind of like, oh, he was a soldier and da 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 da. And big respect to his service. I come from a military family, but that guy was a major in the military. He was not a general. He was not leading an entire base. He might have led a unit. And I respect the hell out of his service. Like, I think service is one of those things where it's just like, that is top of the line work. But he's also a Fox News host. That dude has not run departments before. That, like, to put someone like that on the, as Secretary of Defense is basically, putting out a giant, signal of, hey, we have someone who doesn't know what they're doing right now in the Department of Defense. Please, come talk to us about defense and things like that. It's just, it is a stain on that institution when you put someone who doesn't know government experience, or who isn't experienced in that field, in a position where otherwise the whole point of secretaries is to put someone in that position who understands that field and can work with it. I know, I mean, and I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll hand it off. I don't want to talk too much, but, everyone had talked about, Pete Buttigieg as Secretary of Transportation. They were like, why the hell is Pete Buttigieg Secretary of Transportation? But at first, even I was a little bit skeptical, but you have to remember that, there are some folks who might be secretaries who don't always have a ton of experience, but they have enough experience to get the job done. And I think Pete Buttigieg was one of those picks where, he was the mayor of a relatively large city. It wasn't, New York large or anything, but he understood the tasks that come with transportation issues within a city, and he brought that experience to the White House as the Secretary of Transportation. And I think that's fine, but I think that there is a fine line between, I work in banking policy. I could not tomorrow wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to be the Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Treasury. This is not feasible. And I have experience in that field, yes, but I don't think that qualifies me. I think that someone who, say, has maybe run a bank and has actually done that before, or in Pete Buttigieg's case, he's been a mayor of a city. He's had transportation projects for South Bend probably come across his desk a ton of times, from, train transportation to logistics work to cars, things like that. So I think he's done a good job in that way, but I think that is the whole point of a secretary.
So isn't actually that kind of the opposite of what the American people are saying they want? This past election, didn't we see a really big rebuke of the institutional powers that be, right? The reason Kamala lost, at least according to quite a lot of the people I speak with, is they're tired of the institutions. They are tired of the existing powers who refuse to even acknowledge anything is wrong, right? And Trump, whether you like his policies or not, brings about change. But Mark, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I assume that Trump's had a lot of experience hiring people for his companies. So I hope that he knows how to find talent, like good talent, and put them in positions where their talents can be of benefit to his companies. I don't like the idea of having requirements for cabinet members like that, because sometimes, like, good people are hard to come by. So if you add those requirements, then it's like, if, for your example, if you take like a governor, you said you need to be governor for a cabinet pick, or what was the example?
I had said, I think that I strongly believe that I think that you should at least be a governor or like a senator or someone like that before you become like president. Cabinet members, I think experience in like that field or having some sort of government experience, I think
But
would
then
be important.
who becomes the person who judges that? Like, what is the person, like, who gets to look at the resume and say, oh yeah, this guy can do it?
I mean, I just think in my eyes, I see it as more of like a sound judgment thing. Like, I would not hire the executive of the, UF or WWE, sorry, to be the education secretary, because I'm like, that person has no remote, alignment with education. With Matt Gaetz.
Well, actually, to push back on that just for a sec, Joey, right? Like, maybe I do agree with you that you need some education policy background to make good education policy. But if at the end of the day, the stated goal for the administration is not to pass good federal education policy, but to put it back to the states, isn't it better, at least coming from that perspective, to have someone who's a good executive, someone who's good at making tough decisions and, making sure an organization is efficient? Wouldn't the best person for that be someone like a CEO, someone who's ran their own business?
Yeah, I think in that case, then absolutely. But I think it's one of those things where, if your plan is to absolutely, strip down an entire department that is so fundamental to, the things that we're doing, then I think that that's just, in my eyes, that's not good policy making. That's just bad. I mean, that's bad policy making in my eyes, to absolutely strip down an department that's so essential. And again, I think that, when you do have someone like that who knows how to run an organization, I think that's great experience. But I think that the world of government is so tantalizing at times. I think that it almost is, yes, if your goal is to absolutely wreak havoc, then you're doing that. But at the end of the day as well, if you have someone who doesn't know how to talk to members of Congress and people who are in, private organizations, people who are in advocacy groups, even if those things don't necessarily matter to you, at the end of the day, you're only going to get so far before you're going to receive so much pushback to where you can't get anything done. I mean, remember that, the House right now is on a very, very, very slim margin. And the Senate has a little bit more breathing room with I think it's a 53-47 gap right now. So, the Trump administration can't simply just, bash their way through the government and in 4 years be like, everything is good. We've gotten everything we wanted to get done. There are some, I mean, there's multiple members on the Democratic side and multiple members on the Republican side who, especially in the House, are a lot more moderate. And I think sometimes it's hard to see those folks because there's 435 of them. I think your senators tend to be, more well known, especially the consequential ones. But, it does come down to, yes, if you want to absolutely destroy the Department of Education, Linda McMahon is your girl. But at the same time, are Democrats and even some Republicans in Congress going to allow such, draconian reforms to occur? Probably not. I mean, it even goes back to just the nomination picks. Matt Gaetz, he's not the nominee anymore for AG because too many Republicans in the Senate were like, yeah, man, we can't have you doing that. Like, so again, you have to think of the external factors as well. And I do understand that.
So actually on this, I want to ask Mark, right? Basically, what Joey's saying is the reality of the situation on the ground, but isn't that actually what Americans don't want? They don't want these institutional roadblocks to getting the policy that they elected to be passed down, right? Isn't that the whole reason Trump said he wants to reclassify federal employees to be politically appointed ones so he is able to pass his agenda more effectively? In your view, right? If at the end of the day, I'm guessing your goal is to get conservative policies established throughout the country.
I would say
is the best way to go about it. Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
I would just say good policy, but in my opinion, good policy is conservative policy.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So,
sorry,
I guess with the way that Trump is going about it, right? It is to break down these institutional barriers and put people that are not going to say no to him, even though it gets the policies that maybe you agree with passed. Do you think that the ends justify the means in this specific situation?
I think every politician does things to try to increase their power. Both sides do it. I think one of Trump's big mistakes for his first term was that he wasn't. I think he had a stick and he didn't wield it as much as he should have. But people say like he has a mandate to govern. I think this time around, with him even winning the popular vote, which hasn't happened since 2004, people see like this country needs a change and they want to change. The people have spoken, and he can confidently do what he thinks is right to make not just conservatives' lives better, but every American life better, right? Like politicians have a responsibility to their constituents, but at the same time, they should do what they want to do, and they should be truthful when they're campaigning. Hey, I'm a person who believes this. If you elect me, I'm going to do this because I believe in it, not because I'm doing it for my constituents. So there is a slight, it's a little bit of nuance there. And I think that, especially with like the world getting a little heated right now, people think like we need a strong man in office, not someone who's seems to be in boardroom meetings with like big corporations and getting kickbacks for, shipping stuff to Ukraine or whatever, So yeah, I guess that's what I would say with that.
I guess on the yeah, go ahead, Joey.
I was gonna say I kind of wanted to actually you said something, Mark, that was really interesting to me on this point of like Trump did win the popular vote in this election, and the people want to change, and I think that is one of the reasons why I think Democrats lost, is that Trump continually has shown that like when his electorate base says something, he then goes and does that thing, or he talks about that thing. When Democrats, have their voter base saying certain things, I mean, like Palestine was a huge thing for Democrats, and it was one of those things that
I'm sorry, not all Democrats. I would
not
say
all Democrats,
yeah,
but I would say, but a lot. There was not even Democrats, but just there were a lot of people talking about it, and it was this issue. I mean, like I went to Harris's speech on the ellipse at the White House, and the entirety of the speech, we weren't inside of the White House. We were just right outside of, the gates watching it and listening to it. And there was a big protest that happened right in front of the gates of people who were trying to advocate for Palestinian rights. And it was one of those things where there was a whole uncommitted movement and there was an online movement, and it just really wasn't addressed, and it was largely ignored. And same goes for the economy too. Like the economy was something that was like touched on by Democrats, but like Trump was the person talking about grocery prices. Trump was the person talking about, people, the whole taxes on tips thing, eliminating that. That was a Trump idea. Harris then, quickly supported it. But, it's one of those things where I think that if Democrats want to win, they're going to need to, like you said, Mark, they're going to need to be truthful, but they also need to start listening. Because I think that part of the reason why Democrats are portrayed as, it's kind of a weird two sides of a coin. You have one side where you have this DC bubble here that is filled with all the campaign, people like the high ups and the DNC folks in your consultant class, all talking about what the best thing is to do. And they put out these things like getting the Cheney vote, because every Democrat wants to vote for Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney. And on the other side, you have all of these progressives who, their ideas might not be things that even I agree with as a progressive. But it's a lot of people talking about it to a point where it's kind of like, maybe you should be at least addressing these things and talking about these things. Because it's kind of like when you have this core DNC filled group talking about, appealing to Republicans, and then you have the rest of the world talking about a bunch of different issues, that poses a large problem of, are you even listening to your electorate base? And so, I have to give credit where credit is due, is that, Trump's ideas are bizarre, yes, but he listens to his electorate base, and he's able to market his ideas in a way that appeals to his electorate base. That's just plain and simple. It's how you market it, and it's how you appeal.
How do you think we go from here based on these results, right? How we saw the implosion of the Republican Party with Trump in 2016. How do both of you think the Democratic Party is going to go from here? Because we have very clearly an insider establishment, pro-business base within the Democratic Party. We do. These are the people who are bankrolling the Democrats. We saw this happen in the DNC. Who are the people who had all those rooms rented out upstairs? It was all of the billionaire donor class. And at the end of the day, it was the same billionaire donor class who was donating to the Republican Party as well. I mean, it is kind of mind-blowing that the leading people of today's Republican Party, Donald Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., and Elon Musk, are all so. How do Democrats go from here? And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
I don't want to give them any advice that would help them, but
no, please.
But I'll be honest though. I think the first step is drop identity politics. I think it worked for Obama, but like you can't have like a second black president and it won't be. It's like, all right, we already had the first one. They were trying to run for the first woman president, and that was another identity thing that they were using. But I don't think. I think when you're paying way more for groceries and stuff, people don't care about what kind of person is in office. And then when you divide your constituents up into pieces of a pie, you have your white women, you have your black women, you have your white and whatever. Eventually, like they're inside those groups, they're gonna have disagreements. I think Palestine issue was one of the big ones where I felt like it was rich, like elite Democrats versus more middle and lower class, and then also the Arab American Democrats. It was that split, and I saw it in like even the people that I know, both of them Democrats, and they would both be on like, yeah, support Israel, or yeah, support Palestine. It was a very strong issue for them. I think that's one of the reasons that they dropped it. They didn't like. I think it was like one of the last few weeks of the campaign that Kamala came out and supported Israel, and it was like, yeah, because if she did it way earlier, it might have hurt her campaign even more.
Well, how do you feel about that? The fact that both the establishment side of Democrats and Republicans, the billionaire donor class of both Democrats and Republicans, both have the exact same view when it comes to Israel. It's very staunch support. Even when we see people like Bibi Netanyahu very clearly backstab Biden in every single policy decision-making that's happening.
I would argue Biden
will still
too.
stand by.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna say the first thing I'll say is AIPAC. That right there should tell you enough. I think if you have an organization like that that's just going to bankroll upon bankroll members of Congress, then yeah, you're probably going to have a lot of bipartisan support when you're getting, bipartisan money. And so I think that in itself is the biggest thing on Israel. I agree with you on the identity politics thing. I think that it's become such a thing where, and I'm big on recognizing that, there are certain groups in America that have had it harder than other groups, and we recognize that. But at the same time, we can't keep putting groups into more subgroups, and we can't, because then there kind of is this like divide about like, you know, it's almost what's like, there's something I'm trying to look for here. Like it almost feels like you have these groups split up and you can't actually have a conversation with another group because this group has been put onto a pedestal and you're afraid of saying the wrong thing or you're afraid of doing the wrong thing. And I think that has become so prevalent in democratic politics because you have so many people who talk about, oh, the white woman vote or, oh, the black male vote and things like that into a way where it almost feels like it's not even an election anymore. It's a game. It's about, how can we, appeal to this group of voters by doing this very stereotypical thing? Or how can we appeal to this group of voters doing this very stereotypical thing? I think at the end of the day, a lot of those groups, like you had said, Mark, everyone's struggling in this economy right now. It's not just, black men who are struggling or, white women who are struggling. It's everybody. And so I think that identity politics has been a huge, I don't want to say disaster, but it's just been it's been bad for Democrats because they're not able to take that and make it an effective strategy. And it just keeps hurting them.
Because it's a bad strategy, yeah. I think it just inherently, it's like a bad way to think about people.
I think it's a bad strategy unless that there is some sort of issue where there is a big enough, like, there's enough people within that identity that is hurting. Like, I think with Roe v. Wade, I think that was a good use of identity politics because, yes, a lot of women in this country are going to feel the negative impacts of Roe v. Wade being struck down for years to come. And that is something that I fully believe wholeheartedly. And so I think that is a good strategy when it comes to identity politics. But, when you talk about, subgroups of subgroups, it's kind of like, at what point is this productive to, the overarching issues of things?
Yeah. And you start to like kowtow to the more powerful groups, and then it becomes really obvious who you really care about.
Yeah.
And it's just hurts the people. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you cater to, smaller and smaller and smaller groups, eventually you only have this really small base, and then the rest of the base is like, hey, that's not good policy because that's actually hurting a lot more people, and it's not really doing anything positive for this group.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, do I hear that Joey is also anti-DEI from this conversation?
No, not at all. I just think with DEI, that whole like what was that whole thing back in 2020? Oh, CRT, critical race theory. Like, no, like, anti-DEI, like, I think it's important to learn about our history the way that it actually happened, and that includes understanding how different racial groups have just come up in America, both the good and the bad in that. And I think that this whole anti-DEI thing has been like a big, it's just a point that gets people riled up because when you look at DEI, it's not that bad of a thing at all. It's literally diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's
sorry, I thought, but I want to hear what you're saying.
Yeah, no, like, for instance, like my university campus had an office of, department or a DEI office, and part of that was to ensure that, groups that have historically been, out of certain things like, generational wealth or have had policies that have negatively impacted them. I mean, the whole thing of redlining. I don't know if you've ever heard of redlining before. That alone, in my eyes, is part of the reason why DEI exists, is because there are historical inequities that have plagued our country. And I think that sometimes those things are so taken out of proportion by largely Democrats that it almost harms the issue in a way. When you lean into identity politics so hard, yes, DEI probably doesn't look super appealing to a lot of people because it seems a bit frustrating to look at. But at the same time, like, there are a large amount of Americans who suffer from, they don't have generational wealth like a lot of other Americans do, particularly white Americans, because of redlining and the fact that, segregation wasn't made illegal until like the 60s. So it's kind of like these things that have been historic disenfranchising things are not things that have happened centuries ago or anything like that. They are things that still exist today. I mean, I think it was the late 70s where women could, apply to get a debit card or a credit card in their own name. And so it's kind of like when you think about that, like, there are people who are always going to abuse a system no matter what. Like, that's just common knowledge. Like, people abuse the system. There are also going to be people who are the insane, like those Ben Shapiro videos and those Charlie Kirk videos of like Charlie Kirk owning the libs or whatever. It's like those are the extreme examples of liberals. I have friends who are LGBTQ, or friends who have struggled with financial have had financial barriers put in their place. 9 times out of 10, those people who are on I'm going to say 99 out of 100, the people you see in the Charlie Kirk videos and like those people who look crazy, that's not what talking to someone who is for DEI looks like. It's more understanding that DEI helps to, like, a DEI office helps to make sure that, like Black students, for instance, who, don't have generational wealth or don't have ways to get into college or, have had, generational issues, are able to adapt and overcome to those generational issues easier. And sometimes it might not look fair. But in my eyes, the reason that those exist are because, 60 or 70 years ago, it was not at all fair for the families that were living in America trying to also live the American dream. And that is an opportunity for every student to at least have a pathway to get on the American dream and to be able to go to college and to be able to get a job. And to also not be criticized for just how they look or how they wear their hair. That's my opinion on DEI.
So on that, Mark, both you and I are family of immigrants. We are, minorities within the country as well.
That's
and
what
we're
they say.
directly impacted. Yeah, that's what they say. Where's the big Coptic Christian majority, the silent majority?
Yeah. We exist.
But, we exist, right? Well, we're both directly impacted by policies like DEI. What are your thoughts on it? Is it, one, do you think it was ever necessary? And two, do you think it's necessary today?
I think we shouldn't pay for the sins of our forefathers. A white person who has a grandpa or a great grandpa, or no, sorry, like way back in the day, who was a slave owner, that white person was not the person who owns those slaves. I simply put, I don't think you solve discrimination with more discrimination, and I think that's what DEI is. I think we live in a capitalistic society. The people are paid what they're worth on average, and people who.
Do you think that's the case, though? Do you think people are actually paid what they're worth? Isn't that the biggest grievance people have today?
Well, I would argue that what they're worth is what they're being paid. So if I say like I'm worth 60, but I'm only getting 40, I'm worth 40. Yeah. I know it sucks to hear. I mean, this is what I think, and I might be wrong, and I'm not an economist, but these are my opinions. Like I said, I think it's another form of identity politics, and whenever you discriminate to give someone an edge in like college admissions or a job, what you're doing is you're making it harder for someone else to get that position. And if I was a business owner, I wouldn't care what the person looks like as long as they're good for the job.
Let me ask, wasn't that primarily the reason that a lot of people historically had not hired, let's say, Black people within their particular companies, had not included women within their particular companies, because they use that same type of reasoning. The best person for this job is a white man. It's not a woman who's going to have to go on maternity leave and take up income for 9 months. It's going to be a white man. And that's been the prevailing kind of status quo for quite some time. Isn't that how it's actually historically been used?
I mean, like I said, like if I was hiring someone, I would just look at the resumes. I would completely ignore anything racial. I might not even look at the name. I would just say, okay, what's this guy's experience? What does he bring to the table? Is this guy gonna put money in my pockets? I think that's what corporations need to do. And I think, although DEI comes from a good place, and I do like appreciate that, like being someone who's brown, people like I like that white people think that they owe us for historical wrongs, even though like I haven't been wronged by, like if I'm wronged by a white person, like it's an individual, it's not a whole race. Mm-hmm. I see it as individuality. Like we have a country built on individuality. We can't be blaming something that happened a long time ago on a whole group of people who live now who had nothing to do with it.
Now, real quick, if you don't mind. So I understand your perspective about, like we shouldn't be paying for the sins of our forefathers. For me, that's not how I view it. I agree. Those people who were before me, they had their own actions, and that was what they decided to do. And that, in my eyes, is wrong. I
And no
believe
one's
that's wrong.
blameless. Yeah.
And no one, yeah. But for me, I don't see it as, oh, I'm trying to atone for the sins of my ancestors. More than it is, there are just people in general who a long time ago, but not so long ago, wanted to put people down because of things that they couldn't control. And if there is a pathway for, my tax dollars, or for the person who I have voted into office, or even just my local community, to be able to support people who have otherwise historically been disenfranchised until, of recently in the scope of humanity and the scope of the United States, that to me is in itself a great thing, because I agree with you. If I was a hiring person and I looked at someone's resume, I wouldn't look at their race. I wouldn't look at their name. That's not important to me in that aspect. But when you look at, say home ownership in America, especially nowadays, or you look at, college applications, or you look at even paying for college. Like, I come from, a middle-class family, and I struggle to pay for college. That's not any sort of thing that has to do with my race or anything like that. But in my eyes, like, my family at least did well. If there is a family that has historically, and I'm going to use Baltimore, for example, because I took a class a long time ago and I actually got to learn about redlining in Baltimore. There's an area of Baltimore that's called Penn North. I know, we're kind of all, we went to the same area. So you might know at least somewhat of this area if you've been down to Baltimore, but there's an area called Penn North. And Penn North is this area that was historically redlined as an area that was so undesirable to live in. And so over time, that area has just become perpetually more impoverished. There has not been enough resources given to it. It is an area that, I'm sure that the average home price might be around like 30 or 40,000. I haven't looked in a few years, but it's decrepit homes, and a lot of people who have lived in those areas, that's generations, because those people can't break that cycle of poverty that was forcibly put on them. And I'm not saying that I hold, I'm not holding guilt. I'm saying, you're just trying to be like me. You're trying to live that American dream. You're trying to get far. And if there is a pathway that can help you get to at least a level playing field, not putting you above anybody else, not, saying, oh, we're going to, like, reparations. I think that the whole thing of reparations, I think people have gotten this whole twisted idea that, every Black American is going to receive a check for $100,000 in the mail. That's not how reparations works, nor how
Paid
it
for
should
by
work.
their white neighbors.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, the white neighbor is not going to walk over and be like, here's
No,
a
it's
check.
not.
Joe's about to write his check right now.
All right, here, guys, here, I'll give it to you. Like,
You owe us.
yeah. It's more like, in my eyes, I see reparations as a making in Penn North, putting more money towards affordable housing in Penn North, because that allows families who, up until probably even right now, who have lived in Penn North and have not been able to get out of that cycle of poverty in Penn North, they can have money put into the community to create more affordable housing and to try and revitalize some of these homes and try to put more grocery stores to make, food. Like, that, in my eyes, is what reparations looks like. It's not, handing out checks upon checks. It's putting resources in the right places, and also DEI too. And even learning about CRT and stuff like that. It's like learning that stuff about, like, in my class about Baltimore is the reason I'm able to talk about this. It's about making sure that everyone's on the same playing field. It's not about just giving out money and we feel guilty, so we're going to give you this. It's more like, hey, all of us want to live the American dream. And so if we all want to live the American dream, there people who have historically not been able to do so until as of recently, there's resources for you available to make sure that, no matter what your background is, you have an equal footing at achieving the American dream and living, life as you want to be able to live it, as long as you are able to contribute to society and do your part in being an American.
So isn't this the whole reason why affirmative action was overruled, right? Was because it wasn't really an equality of opportunity, but it was presented at the very least as an equality of
such.
outcome, right? People did not like the fact that colleges like Harvard or other top Ivy League schools were requiring a minimum percent of their incoming student base to be a certain demographic, right? Now, there's been creative ways to go around that through things like income considerations, which I personally do think are far better metric than race to begin with, 100%.
Sorry, as far as like figuring out who goes to your college and whatnot?
Yeah, so like right now, at least before affirmative action was overruled, colleges could factor in race when determining who to allow in to their university. And this was pretty much historically discriminated against Asian Americans in top Ivy League schools like Harvard due to overrepresentation.
And why were they over?
Well, it was for several factors, but primarily it was due to there are more issues on affirmative action, but primarily the reason the overrepresentation existed was because of endowments and legacy admissions, rather than the inclusion of race. If that's more so my personal perspective. Now, that's not what the students who brought the case to the court were arguing. Rather, they were more so arguing of the fact that it was entirely because of this race consideration was this unequal outcome that was occurring at universities like Harvard. So I'm just like,
well,
I
will
feel like
bring
we're seeing
up this one thing with Harvard specifically. Even like they tried to make it more representative of the whole population, but when you bring underrepresented like races into your college, and then you got to look at their dropout rates. And like I know for Harvard, the African Americans there were having a very high dropout rate. You have to take other considerations into account with as far as like what people need to do to get through college and whatnot. Like I don't like looking at it by race, and I don't think race should be even a factor at all. But in like college admissions, I think the colleges need to filter out who goes into what major using stuff like SAT scores and whatnot, because you need to know upfront if you're mentally capable of doing certain jobs. And different fields have different requirements of that, but that's the driving factor with like what colleges need, because you don't want to give people
aren't standardized testing though an unequal way of measurement? Because if you come from a wealthy family, you can pay for your kids to go get as much test preparation as possible, the top level scores, right? If that's all you focus on, of course you're going to get the richest people coming into these universities and getting the best level education, right? How do you fix for that without also coming off as kind of the quote white liberal savior?
Now we have a system based on meritocracy, and it rewards people that have more ability to do complex things, right? It's not.
What do we consider meritocracy?
If we gave everyone like an equal opportunity for SAT prep, I think that'd be perfect. Give everyone the same amount of prep, and then whoever's richer, I guess, would pay for more. But even prep, I don't think that increases your chance of getting a higher SAT by that much. Maybe like 100 or 200 points, but there's a certain limit to it.
Well, so do you mind if I go back to something real quick that you had said, Mark, about the African American dropout rate at Harvard was being like, it was kind of like students would go to Harvard and then they would drop out, and it was the biggest rate. I think
and then they had loans they had to pay out. Like there's very huge things that they have to pay for that.
And I think that's the perfect example that kind of backs up what I had said earlier, is that programs like affirmative action, it's great that we were able to get students who didn't have those opportunities into schools sooner, but affirmative action is a band-aid. It's not a solution, because what you had students who, might have, and a lot of those students who were able to go, to colleges through affirmative action, a lot of them were talented people. But then if you had just this quota of race and you said, okay, student A who didn't have any resources to be able to succeed in school and didn't have a support system at home and lived in poverty at home and didn't have any, good food access at home, you're going to go to Harvard because we think that we need to have about 5% of our population be Black. That student is smart and capable, but at the same time, putting a student in and saying affirmative action works without having any sort of resource behind it in order to get that student to where they need to be in order to actually succeed at a school like Harvard is really what the underlying issue is. And I think that, if we're talking about, the election and stuff, I mean, this is my wheelhouse right here. Like this is why I love policy. But, like if we want to turn it back to the election, it's like a lot of Democratic issues were Band-Aids. I mean, point blank, a lot of them were Band-Aids, and and same thing with, on the Republican side as well. But, and that's
Play with the
unfortunately,
numbers.
yeah,
Make it
like
look good.
it's kind of like politics is a game of here's all the Band-Aids we can put on this wound, not how do we cure the wound in the first place. And, it's kind of like when you have affirmative action, yes, it looks like a great plan and it's getting more, in my eyes, I see it as both a good plan that was poorly executed, if that makes sense. Because I think that there should be more students who otherwise would not have had the opportunity to go to Harvard decades ago to go to Harvard. How are you going to prepare those students to be on the same playing field as other students who are going to Harvard? And sometimes that is the way it is that you're never always going to be. I mean, like, shoot, there's people who work in DC whose parents got them jobs in Senate offices. I can't compete with that. My parents are working class Americans. But at the same time, I also know that my parents have helped set me up on a path to where I'm able to at least be competitive in that job market. And I think that that is kind of the same thing with college admissions and affirmative action is how can we not just get students of color into more universities, but how can we prepare students to make sure they are on the same playing field so that they can go to a university that they choose to go to, not that they have to, check in a box or be a statistic for a university, because that's demeaning to those students.
So actually on this, I want to ask you, Joey, a question I asked Mark a little bit ago, right? Which is that ultimately there's these policies that a lot of progressives want to pass, like good intention policies, right? We want an equal opportunity for everyone. That's, I think, something conservatives even agree with. You want equal opportunity, not
want
equal
the people,
outcome, right?
We want the people that can contribute a lot to the markets to get in those positions where they can help the markets.
Certainly.
Because in
Exactly.
100, 200 years, with the current rate of innovation being as high as it can be, this is why we do any of this. This is why we went from like the Industrial Revolution to where we are now,
You're exactly right. But I think the biggest roadblock we're seeing on both sides are inefficiencies within our current institutions. So, same question to you, Joey. With a Democratic president or a Democratic administration, do the ends justify the means? Should Democrats be more forceful in pushing through policies and not really care about the fallout, kind of like how Republicans have been going on about it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm a policy guy. I'm not a campaigns guy. So like I enjoy the non-sexy part of politics and the non-sexy part of government. And you can say you want to do all these things, and I'm a big proponent. I want healthcare for all. I want, free college tuition. But like you had introduced me and like I say I'm a pragmatic progressive. I understand that you can't just say here's free college and not have a plan in place. I mean, it's just like what I've been saying for a lot of these policies is that I think that, first and foremost, a lot of the programs that are paid for in the United States, no matter what kind of program it is, whether it's a defense program or whether it's an agricultural program, it's paid through our taxes. And if we have companies in America who are doing business in America using American markets, using American labor, using American citizens to do work, those companies should not be utilizing so many tax loopholes that they're not paying taxes. Point blank. And I think that when Democrats can effectively market that, because there's, Bernie Sanders has been saying it forever, but for some reason, Democrats don't want to embrace the fact that Bernie Sanders is popular in the Democratic Party among voters.
Yeah, that was a big mistake.
Yeah, huge mistake. And they had two chances to do it, and they still messed it up. I could have used a different word there, but I refrained.
Bernie 2028?
God, at this point, I mean, he's
young.
won a. Hey, he's just the age for the office.
I'm saying Jimmy Carter 2028.
Okay.
Listen,
Biden,
Jimmy
you know?
Carter could be president, Bernie is VP. But,
Nah.
it's one of those things where Democrats are just trying to say that, oh, we want all these policies and oh, we want all these things. And it's great. I want free college. I want Medicare for all. I want all the. But how are you going to actually be able to achieve that in a fiscally responsible way? And also in a way that is not going to, in 5 years, have an incredibly negative output. What you first need to do
Can I
is
push back on that, actually?
go for it, please.
So I think actually Trump proved this to be completely incorrect, right? Democrats, I think, are way too much in the details, right? Look at the debate with Biden and Trump. Why did Biden do so bad? It's because he was deep into the numbers, and that's all he was doing, is just reciting facts and figures and talking about policy. But people don't care about
He didn't
policy.
have his map that day.
Trump, yeah, that's right. Like even in under Trump, during his first term, he was not fiscally responsible whatsoever. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act was not paid for by any means. The first COVID bill was not paid for. Biden continued that. But I think the biggest difference is that Trump, regardless of what his actual policies might be, will say what people want to hear. He's not going to talk about the details because people can't wrap their heads around these numbers and how it's going to impact them or being fiscally responsible. Republicans will say that they're fiscally responsible, but turn around and do the other thing. Democrats will say they stand for certain policies and they won't budge whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Because
they're afraid of the radical wings, for the progressive types.
Yeah, actually, I think Mark has it. Yeah, Mark has it on the. Yeah, it is a fear of the fact that, if there's any pushback from the, progressive side. And I think that brings up the question of, why are we not as Democrats? And I myself am not a strong Democrat. I will say that. I am much more into progressive policies than I am into being a Democrat. I voted Democrat, but I'm not, a gung-ho, oh my gosh, I love Democrats and would do anything for the DNC. It's more like,
Me neither.
Wait,
well,
what?
either side.
No
I'm not
way.
saying for the GOP either. I'm not diehard GOP. That's why I don't say I'm a Republican. There's a big difference. I like what you're saying.
Exactly. Well, and for me, it's like, I think that there are times where Democrats do get so wrapped up in the details, but simultaneously, there's two sides to it. You can campaign on these big issues and say, oh my gosh, like we want to have free healthcare for all. But at the end of the day, your job is also to be a policymaker. You're not just sitting out here, putting on a show and then going home to the White House and doing nothing. And, well, that's debatable. But, it's also kind of like, you are a policymaker. So at the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of concrete plan in place to be able to get that done. So I think that Democrats need to have this fine line of, I think, ironically, the party that is so for, DEI and that last I being inclusion needs to make their policies just generally more inclusive. Because what you have is these policies that are so wrapped up in the details that people can't learn about them. People can't understand them. And so if you want policy to be good, you first need to market that policy and make it sexy and say, ooh, free college. And then there needs to be, hey, it doesn't even need to be complex. It's, hey, in order to pay for free college, we want to first be able to make it so that people are paying their fair share in taxes. And then those tax dollars get used for fiscally responsible programs that ultimately down the road help pay for free college. There's a program in the Treasury. It's a bipartisan program. It's called the CDFI Fund. And it's one of those programs where instead of, money being handed out to banks, it's a hand up. These monies get handed out to, or oh my goodness. Sorry, I'm stuttering over my words here. These dollars get invested into local financial institutions for them to then be able to take those government dollars and, $1 might be turned into $8 through an affordable housing project or through, some sort of, multi-use building that was leveraged that's going to create economic development. That's the kind of stuff that is in the details, yes. But when you say, hey, we want to make people who don't pay taxes, and then we want to turn those tax, dollars into fiscally responsible projects that can then generate economic revenue and economic opportunity in general, and take some of that money and put it towards, paying for free college eventually, that's not an incredibly hard thing to make look sexy, because you already have 3 steps to that plan. There's just policy around it that, of course, is in the details that people can read and it's accessible to them. But ultimately, you've marketed that. Yeah.
I mean, today we might be seeing that Republicans are better at least today, at campaigning and getting their messaging across. But I guess, Mark, would you say that Democrats are better at just overall governing?
No. What?
Well, if
What?
you take a look at just
No way.
overall total number of policies passed between Biden and Trump, both had 4 years, both had a majority in Congress during a certain part of their administration. Just look at the total number of policies passed, right? Based on just that alone,
okay,
would you say
there's
it's
a couple
more
of things.
effective? Yeah.
I wouldn't judge it by the amount of policies, because not all policies are created equal. And like I said before, one of the biggest criticisms of Trump that people said about him were like, he wasn't using his power effectively. He wasn't doing as much as he could have. So hopefully this time around, he puts policies through that help everyone, not just people who voted for him. But I mean, no.
Well, Joe
Well,
Joe Biden did many effective things, and I don't think that Joe Biden should have been on a second term by any means. But in my eyes, I think that Joe Biden had effective policies, but I wasn't exactly, like, I was hoping that someone would have taken Joe Biden's place, which inevitably happened way later than I thought it would. But I guess with Trump, it's kind of like that, in my eyes, that first term showed that he wasn't capable of getting the job done and picking the right people for the job. And in himself, as the executor of policy, wasn't able to effectively execute policy and also help create good policy.
But he also had everyone against him. Like, it was, he had a hard time doing anything back then. I think this time around, it's way more clear that people are with him. Back then, it felt like he was president and he had the country hostage or something. Like, he didn't have the mandate that he does now. And I'll also say, like, being a conservative, like, one of the bigger tenets that we hold is we want, like, as a libertarian conservative, well, like a small government, it should only has a couple of legitimate uses and like functions. That's why we support getting rid of some of these departments and whatnot. But it's not by. I think we just need to make sure we're looking at the right metrics here. It's not just numbers of policy. It's like money in people's pockets, stock market, stuff like that.
I mean, I think the number of policy, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. But I also think at the same time, we have to look at the quality of policy. I mean, the Trump tax cuts and what was it? It's the official title, I think, is the Tax Cuts and Jobs
TCJ.
Act. Yeah. That's created such a deficit for us. And that was pre-COVID. That wasn't a COVID era, bill. I can give some sort of leeway to Trump in the COVID era because that was a difficult era to navigate.
Well,
I think a lot of
here's the thing. Like, you're saying there's a deficit because he didn't tax enough. I would say there's a deficit because we're spending way too much. We're tagging it from the different.
Well,
yes
two things,
and
right?
no.
If you have a certain level of spending and you're falling below with your revenue collections, is it the smartest fiscal decision to cut your revenues even further and not do anything about your spending levels, right? You both have to go in one way. Now, at least this time around, Trump is saying, look, we want to do cuts across the board and bring that down all as a way to be able to pay the next round of tax cuts. But I don't think really at the end of the day, at least the current Republicans in office, care about fiscal responsibility by any means.
And I think for me, like when I see policy, like, I think the Biden administration has produced, and I am not a Joe Biden stan by any means. I want to put this asterisk there. Like, I am a purely policy guy. And so I look at the Biden administration and there are so many domestic policy wins for America. I mean, the infrastructure, the investment, and it's a long title, IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, was one of the most consequential bills to have been passed for America in God knows how long, because that is a bill that is effectively going to fix a lot of our broken infrastructure and help, get things like lead pipes out of our system and help to increase jobs in America. And that goes simultaneously with the CHIPS Act to help produce more, semiconductors and computer components here in America to have American-made things. And I think I'm going to be so honest, I think that if Democrats had campaigned on that more and had actually made that a selling point of that act, because I felt like they really did not talk about that a lot on the campaign trail, I feel like they probably could have gotten a way bigger solid chunk of working class people, because the IIJA helped so many Americans in any area of America, whether it was an urban area or a rural area, whether it was a, rich area or a poor area. It helped to fix bridges, ports, airports, highways, rail. Like rail in America right now is having a renaissance, and I'm a big, transportation guy. I love my metros, I love my Amtrak, and
I'll give you that. I'll give the Democrats that. I like public transportation. That's one thing I'll give you.
Like, we love our public transit, but
we'll take what we get.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I've been fair, I think.
But I think for, that's just two, bills, the CHIPS Act and the IIJA. But that's good policy making in my eyes. That is not just hey, I'm going to cut a bunch of these taxes because I want to be fiscally conservative. That's fine. You can have the viewpoint of being fiscally conservative and want to cut taxes. I think that when you talk about cutting taxes, you have to view it as any sort of fiscally responsible act needs to be viewed as an investment, because the IIJA, in my opinion, is an investment. If we're repairing our bridges and we're repairing our roads and we're repairing all of our transportation hubs, that's a huge investment in our economy. When we're just cutting taxes for the sake of cutting taxes and gutting out things, that's not investment in things. That's things that potentially could down the road harm us and harm our economic sectors and harm the communities that people across America call home. Point blank.
Well, to push back on that just a little bit, I think this is actually where Trump maybe does pretty good in being effective. And what I mean by being effective is that when we look at Biden's record with all of the policies he passed, all of these are longer term policies that aren't really going to affect Americans for years down the road. Whereas Trump comes into office and he'll take policies like the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and try to pass it almost immediately, which is going to have a direct impact on Americans. And so, be it good or bad, Americans are going to feel it, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is, regardless of what Democrats might say, that, hey, we got this bill passed, this is how much money we're going to be spending into your communities. If people don't see that almost immediately, they're not going to care, and they're going to think you're not doing anything. And actually, worse than that, they're going to be like, oh, you just spent $10 billion for something I'm not going to see for 5 years? No, you're wasting my money, right?
Yeah, that is a very, very valid viewpoint. And I agree with that. I mean, honestly, it goes back to inflation. Really, when you look at it, it's like inflation. And again, I'm not an economist by any means, but, inflation is one of those things where we had such a turbulent economic time. We had two in the past, 2 decades. Is we had the Great Recession and then we had the pandemic. And those were huge economic crises that are going to take time to build. But I think that the Biden administration has not done a good job of trying to convince people that it is a process that takes time. There's all these interest rates getting raised and things like that. And if you look at economic principles, you can see that over time that's going to be good, because then that will help reduce, I don't want to say this wrong, but basically raising interest rates creates it so that there's not a ton of money coming into the system. It's helping to prevent, bursts or something like that. I could have said
demand.
That. Reduces demand. Yeah, thank you. Like it's more like it reduces demand, and over time, that is going to be good for the economy. But again, like you said, it's not an instant effect, and so you have to market that in a way that's going to say, hey, no, we're recovering from these economic crises, and so doing this is going to help us, stay on another path instead of, what typically happens with Democrats is them going to their voter base and saying, we know more than you, let us handle it, no big deal.
Free money.
Yeah, literally, like it's
Trans-
like it's just Democrats just don't know how to talk to people, and so because of that, there's good policy making that happens, but that policy is not marketed to people who are not in the policy world. And I'm a policy bro. I love looking at that stuff. But I also understand that people don't look at bills every day. People don't like there's people who don't live in DC who don't understand the intricacies of policy. And Democrats need to understand that this bubble that they're in of like, we know what we're doing, so just like shut up and let us do our thing is a horrible strategy. People need to understand and be marketed. Like there needs to be policy. Yeah.
I would just push back in saying that I feel like good policy is easy to explain. And I don't like that some of these huge policies are like this thick, and then they got like a million things in them that have nothing to do with what the title says.
Also fair, yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
But also one thing I want to add here is, I know you said people don't like free money. I don't think that's exactly right. People love.
I don't think people
money.
understood. I don't think people understand free money.
People don't understand it, but they love getting that check. With
free money.
Trump, people remember his name being on the checks they received, and they're like, "Oh, Trump gave me money." But when Biden did the same thing, he didn't put his name on it, and people didn't realize that. With Obama, he put his name on it. There were certain parts like the mandate of Obamacare, which people didn't like, and then they had a huge negative connotation across Obamacare. But if you go to a rural American today and ask them, what are your thoughts on Obamacare? They're going to say they hate it. If you ask them, what are your thoughts on the Affordable Care Act? They're going to say they love it. People are not opposed to free money. They're not opposed necessarily to progressive policies either. It's about how it's messaged and packaged to them.
Yes. What if, so you're talking about people, they like free money versus they don't like free money, but what if giving them free money is not good for them even if they want it, Like, that.
Yeah. Look, I think the tax
like
cuts, right? Tax cuts are free money, essentially, right? Tax cuts by reducing your tax burden gives you money back.
I disagree. No, it's not free money. It's letting you keep more of your own money that you worked hard to get.
I do agree with that stance, yes.
When Democrats, like, this is something that kind of annoys me. When they talk about my money like it's theirs, it's like, no, you sat in an office and you're writing on a piece of paper that I owe you this for some reason, and then you're voting on it. There is a legitimate place for taxation, and again, wanting small government. We can talk about those things. Like, nah. So, public education, roads, maybe even roads might be able to privatize. I'm not really sure. Like policing, military. In my opinion, that's basically it. Like maybe jails, because like public jails or private jails is its own thing. It's a whole thing,
Just, I think overall with privatization, there runs the factor of like someone getting greedy. Honestly, that at the end of the day, I think that there are certain public goods that just have to be regulated, and I think that there needs to be, of course, checks and balances put into that. But I mean, like, trying to think of like honestly, roads. I think if we were to privatize roads, I think you would start to see roads, like, I think you would start to see a lot more toll roads, and at the same time, you'd probably see roads, and at the same time, you would also see a lot of those roads. Some of the companies might take care of them, but it's also at the same time, like, there's no guarantee on that unless there is a regulation of the roads. And so it's kind of like you have to find.
So actually, let me bring a good example on this.
I don't have a strong opinion on this. It was just
so actually, I did live in Texas on this, and I saw privatization occur right in front of my eyes, where the majority of the highway system is privatized in Texas. And you will find that almost everything has a toll road in Texas. And if you pay the toll road, it's a very nice road that you get to drive on. It definitely is way nicer than Pennsylvania roads, if I could say. There's no potholes, okay? But you'll find as well, the people who are going on those roads are not lower or middle class Americans. They're the people who have a lot of disposable income, who can afford to spend those few extra dollars to save a few extra minutes on their commute. Everyone else, the actual public road system is not funded well. And so it creates a lot of backlog, a lot of traffic. causes people to be late for their work. And
City planning
that's
issues.
exactly. I think that's what you see is that oftentimes privatization ends up getting a lot of favorable treatment as opposed to public infrastructure. And that's why people oftentimes have a negative connotation with the government or government programs is they're never funded to the levels that they actually need to be to become effective in the first place. And it's
Yeah.
hard to get that funding when you're taking the public's money. When it's
Yeah.
private and people are voluntarily giving you money, then it's really no problem because
Well,
they gave it to
I'll
you, you
say
can
this.
blow it all.
Like, one of the like most beautiful things about capitalism is that the whole market kind of works like a neural network, right? And so if you have all these companies that are incentivized to get the best solutions for the cheapest price, for the cheapest cost, and they're trying to make money on that, that competition is what would lead people to have, like, I can make a really good road. Oh, I can make an even better road for less. And then when you just open it for let them fight over the money, yeah, I think it would be cheaper than, maybe even cheaper than public, and better quality. I have nothing to back that up.
Now, what if both of
So-
those companies decide that, hey, wait a minute, we're both making a ton of money. Why don't we just merge together and then start
Antitrust.
charging even more money on
No,
that?
antitrust. I do think competition. One of the things that government should do is regulate monopolies. Like, obviously.
So Mark is on board with Google being broken up, Apple being
Oh,
broken
yeah.
up.
I hate Google, to be honest, and most
Yeah.
conservatives do, I think. So,
But that's the thing is, I think, it's crazy because I think we're in this huge cycle of, like, I feel like this conversation has actually really represented it well in a very positive way. Like, we've talked a lot about these issues, and then, like, simultaneously, like, first and foremost, money in politics. I mean, how much lobbying do you think Google has probably done to get to the point that they're at right now? Because I guarantee you, if people weren't being paid by, like, a lobbyist or getting campaign funds or things like that, like, Google probably would not be in the position of power in the tech world that it is in right now. And same thing goes for a lot of other companies as well that are, large scale companies.
yeah, they're just after their dollar. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing whatever they can to make bigger,
to make a dollar, but
Yeah.
there's no regard for capitalism except when it is I don't want to fumble what I'm about to say, but, like,
when it's beneficial to the donors.
exactly. Capitalism for a Walmart, for instance. Walmart is so hostile. There's a Walmart everywhere, and they just drive out, like, competition.
because basically monopoly. And you're
Basically,
saying-
it is a monopoly. In my
Yeah.
eyes, I see Walmart as a monopoly. But also at the same time, the Walton family is obscenely rich. But they're going to believe in capitalism when it comes to sitting down in the room with, a senator or, a representative or, whoever it may be, and show faith. But, I think the whole thing with politics, and I believe in this, is that your actions do speak louder than your words. But unfortunately, right now in politics, those words are just too damn loud. The actions are not actually, taking place, or they're not actually being implemented in the right way. And I think that, yeah. Go ahead.
And look, I think both of you are right that I think in modern day, liberal types of economic ideas, conservative ideas on economic policy, same with libertarian ideas on economic policy, are currently overrepresented in our Congress and in our politicians. We don't really have any kind of true progressive state legislature, any kind of true progressive movement within the United States as of today. The last time we really had it was maybe during FDR's time, and even that, there was issues with how progressive that policy was or that era was. But when these
Movement,
types
not
of
action.
exactly, there's movements, not actions, and when we actually do see a true kind of populist, economic populist be elected to office, gets elected over 4 times, right? And some people might be comparing completely on the other side, but Trump to FDR's kind of economic populism, but in the completely opposite direction. Does that mean Trump should also get more than 2 terms? A different reading of the.
Could you just give me a definition of populism? Because I have an idea of what it means, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So populism is defined in a lot of different ways, but generally speaking, it's the prevailing popular idea amongst the public at any given time. That's what I would personally view as populism. Economic populism is more so like, what is the most populist type of policy that's going to benefit most Americans? That's how I see as populism.
I would agree with that definition, and something I actually like. So when I was in college, I wrote my senior thesis on celebrities in elections, and that was really interesting because my case study was the Pennsylvania 2022 Senate race, and so for me, a lot of what I had to do research on was populism in that election. Because on one hand, yes, you kind of had Dr. Oz, appealing to a lot of Pennsylvania folks and kind of talking about these traditional issues. But on the other hand, you had John Fetterman, who looked like an everyday Pennsylvanian. And I don't mean that, I'm not saying that like, to snub Oz. I'm saying that this dude is 6'6" and had like a goatee and wore a hoodie everywhere. And, it's kind of like when you have someone that looks like you and is talking about you, oh, by the way, lives in a steel town and is talking about unions and workers, that's the kind of populism that I think the Democratic Party needs to lean into. I mean,
Yeah,
Fetterman.
but does the party need to lead more into Fetterman? He ran on populist ideas,
He ran on
not how he
populist ideas
governs.
and not how he governs. No. And,
He's one of us.
And,
He is.
here's what I will say about Fetterman. And I'm going to choose my words very carefully here because I do have a respect for him. He was just one of the first politicians I got to know, like in high school. Like I just knew him as Lieutenant Governor Fetterman.
Me too.
But
I have respect for him too, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But his style of governing is certainly different than what he said on the campaign trail. I think that he has the right idea of how to reach out to voters. Because you'll notice that a lot of Democratic candidates in any office, in this cycle went out to, and he wasn't a candidate, but of course he was, helping to campaign in Pennsylvania. You'll notice that a lot of them went to like the urban cores and they went to suburbs. Where was John Fetterman at? John Fetterman was in Venango County, which is deep red, Pennsylvania. John Fetterman was over in Erie County. John Fetterman was talking to, rural Pennsylvanians across, small towns and highlighting that. I think that if Democrats want to truly lean into populism, they can't just say that they want to lean into populism and then go hold rallies in New York and Milwaukee and, Miami or, Atlanta. They've got to go into those rural areas because even though, yes, you're not going to get all the electoral votes, it shows that you understand that there are people who live in those areas and are impacted by those policies that you put out.
And this is exactly why I thought a lot of liberals thought that, Trump going to New York City was completely nuts. Going to California was completely nuts. But
Kelly, yeah.
actually,
yeah.
Well, here's the thing. He wasn't going there because he thought he was going to win those states. He might say it publicly, but no, he does
Well,
not
New York
actually
was
think he's
closer
going
than
to
you
win.
think, but yeah.
Cali was also closer. But
Okay.
I think the main reason he went was because he saw that there were certain districts that are swingable even in these deep blue counties and states. I mean, Long Island alone is very pretty conservative, actually, and it almost did go for Trump this time around. So I think Trump knows what Americans are feeling, Americans the right thing at the right time. Whether the policies are going to be good for them, I completely disagree with. But you have to give him credit where credit is due. He knows how to tap into the American psyche, and he knows how to play us. Very much so.
Play us.
Well, play us as in like he knows what to tell us to make us feel the things that he wants us to feel.
No,
That's what an effective politician does.
I agree with you. I was just, but no, he had a TV show for like 10, 20, I don't know how many years. Like this guy's been famous since forever. He knows how to get people talking about him. Probably why he won 2016. As far as like, it sounds like when you say populism is whatever just like people want as a whole. I thought that it was when you saw Kamala run with more right wing ideas, and she was like parroting Trump's lines. It kind of tells you that's what they both thought the country was at, because that's where they were trying to meet. Because if you saw Trump trying to be like a fake Democrat, then you would say like, oh, it's because the prevailing narrative is that Democrat policies are the ones that are good to go with. That's why he jokes like he wanted to give her a hat or whatnot. But
Well, I think this is the big dilemma when it comes to Democratic politicians. Now, is that their policies and what they actually want at the end of the day are very, very similar, because it's all through corporate donors and corporate interests. That's really who these policies end up benefiting. The thing, though, is that Trump says the right things to make people feel bad enough about their current position and to actively go out and vote against Democrats who are campaigning. That's the biggest issue. I don't believe that the current populist movement, economic populist movement in the US is in favor of conservative policies whatsoever. Most people don't want a broad-based tax cut across the board where
I think
billionaires
Trump's so
continue
moderate.
to get richer.
I think Trump is way more moderate than people would give him credit for.
Wait,
You think he's a moderate?
I do think he's way closer to the center.
Rhetoric.
His
policies
policy.
are rhetoric.
His policy,
Okay.
not his rhetoric.
Rhetoric. Okay.
I was like,
He's a radical moderate.
think
He's all modern.
I think Trump, I don't know if I would even qualify. I would, and don't think that he is a moderate policy person. That being said, I don't think he's far right either. I think that he is a right-leaning politician.
Yeah,
But
because he has like classical liberals on his side. Like,
yeah, like I think that I don't want to say that he's a moderate, but I also, like, when I say that, I'm not like he's far right. I think he's a right-leaning politician, point blank. I do think that, and again, kind of leaning into that populism idea of like Trump appealed to the common man at the end of the day. It wasn't about, how crazy can this guy get? It goes back to the McDonald's thing. Like, he went to McDonald's and he went, he drove the garbage truck around and was wearing the vest at the podium.
that'll be in
talking
the
to
kids'
voters.
history books. Like,
It will.
100%.
Well, yeah, because you look at that and there are people who can put themselves in his shoes because he's able to effectively market that message. And yes, do I think it's ridiculous? Absolutely. Because I'm like, why is a millionaire business owner guy who is super famous wearing a dump truck vest and driving a dump truck? But at the same
think about
time,
it. He went from felon to a fast food worker to a garbage collector to now president of the United States, right? Isn't that the American dream?
In 3.
But it is very much there are many Americans who see Trump and the things that he talks about, they can put themselves in those shoes. When Democrats talk about ideas, there is this idea that we should be more inclusive and that we should have these policies that put people in inclusive things, or not inclusive things, in things that otherwise were not available to them at one point. But then on the contrary to that, there's not a lot of listening done by the Democrats to actually make themselves overall an inclusive place. I mean, like, government in general is not an inclusive place, but, like, Democrats have an identity problem of themselves being too elite. And they're perceived as that. Democrats are not the party of working class people right now. And I think, that's why Sherrod Brown in Ohio, he lost. That dude was a working class guy, and he got his butt kicked in his election. And that sends a very clear message that Democrats are not they're not the party of the working people right now. If the Democrats can get the working class back on their side and get the people who are in unions back on their side, and the people who, are economically distraught right now on their side, that's how they're going to win the election. It's not about getting Charlie XCX, branding on all of your, campaigns, or running $20 million concerts because they're popular. At the end of the day, that's not going to win an election.
Yeah. Or promising musicians and not having them sing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. With Beyonce or the rumors of Taylor Swift.
That was.
Oh, yeah.
But I guess I know we're running quite long here as well, so I want to be respectful of y'all's time. But I guess if we want to wrap up with one final thing, with the passage of this past election, right? We know what happened. We know what the results were. There's going to be analysis done over and over and over again. I guess if we look to the future, 2026 midterms coming up.
Mm-hmm.
how do we go from here? Meaning, do you guys think that 2026 will be a referendum on Trump and Democrats will win and they'll be able to change messaging around? Or do you think it's going to be the same thing? Democrats are not going to learn their lesson and they're going to get wiped out again in 2026?
Well, I mean, I think the midterms will be a litmus test for 2028, but I think even before then, we've got some state house elections going on in 2025, and I think that those first and foremost, I mean, here in Virginia, we have our election for our new governor. We have an election for our entire state house. Our state senate isn't for another 2 terms or another 2 years. So some of these smaller state house races, if these Democrats can effectively bring the message of being the class of the working party and being the class that helps promote economic opportunity and equity, I think in 2026 you might certainly see a working class push. I think that's what Democrats need right now, and if they want to be able to retain one or both chambers of Congress, there's a big margin that they need to fill. They need to appeal to the people that are actually their electorate base versus a small set of people who are not even some of these smaller groups of people within the Democratic Party are not even, being that loud, but the focus is so on them and Democrats are too afraid of any sort of, lashback from that they're not going to stand up to other wings of their, parties. There should be healthy discussion within the party about, how they can come to compromises on certain issues and ensure that they're focused on the majority of Americans, not the, sexy, gosh, like we're going to do this. And then it's kind of like, great, you've helped 1,000 voters out of millions upon millions.
Yeah. And you've helped them for one day.
And one
Not
day.
for a year.
Exactly.
Yeah, or forever.
So again, working class is really the key. And I would also argue that some rural Democrats and suburban Democrats are also the key. I think that's really going to be, you want to get the working class back, you can't just hit your cities anymore. You gotta be going around to all the areas that matter.
Yeah, definitely. What about Mark? Final words from you. Do you think Democrats have a chance to come back in 2026, or do you think there's no way?
I think you can gauge how they're feeling by what they're going to be saying on TV. Because if they're still going to be like, we lost because they did something wrong, or we lost because their podcaster, they were crazy and for some reason they tricked the constituents to voting their way. If they keep talking like that, like they don't respect the intelligence of their audience, they're gonna just hemorrhage people.
Yeah.
Like it's
yeah.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to help them too much, but I don't think they'll listen to me.
Keep speaking.
No, I don't think they're gonna listen to me. But I think that's a good way to gauge, because they all say the same thing. So I don't know whoever's feeding them their lines, but if you watch all of the shows, they attack positions from the same area. So I don't know if they're getting like donor class talking points or whatever, but those donor class talking points are not what the people want. I think that's what Joe's saying. Joey's saying, like, it just the disconnect between, just because the rich won't, the top 1%, the 1%, they have all the money. The 1%, yeah, they have all the money, but they don't have votes because there's such a tiny amount of people. So I think the game for Democrats is to try to use that money from the 1% to get the poorest bottom chunk of people, like the lower class, because that's where you're going to get your votes from. I think that's
that's effectively what they need to do for policy too.
Yeah,
that's my view.
It's good to help as many people as you can, but that's one of the ways they were losing support with the middle class, because when you seem like you're taking money from the top and you're throwing it in the bottom, and you're not affecting tax policy in the middle, and these people, like, it doesn't seem fair to
Certainly, yeah, and I think I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I would like to give Republicans one piece of advice.
Yeah,
I would just say, I feel like we push too many people away from our side of things. I think it comes off as hateful when it really shouldn't. If we truly believe that our ideas are the ideas that are right, we should be able to pitch it in a way where we're not antagonizing people that we're trying to change their minds. Because if you're attacking someone for thinking differently from you, and you're insulting them in the process, there's no chance they're going to come. And like shows on either side, podcasts on either side, people tend to watch what they agree with. So I don't think people are getting the whole spectrum of opinions. Not too many people are watching shows of different backgrounds.
Very much agreed.
So that's what I would say to individuals.
That's exactly right. And that's kind of the thinking behind a show like this as well. And that's why I kind of named it Of the People as well, right? I want to have a pretty diverse set where we're not just spewing, the elitist kind of talking points. I want to have an actual discussion of actual people, and nothing is actually scripted. So I think this is a great discussion. Really appreciate you guys coming on, and hopefully we'll be able to do something else in the future as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And Mark, it's always good talking to you.
You too, man. No, I was very happy that you contacted me for this.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Well, I'll be reaching out, and I'll let you know when the final video is uploaded. But hey, thanks so much for taking the time today. I know we went over, but I really appreciate it.
No,
Absolutely,
it was a pleasure.
It was, seriously, I'm echoing that. It was such a pleasure.